Where has God gifted you? Where has God enabled you to excel at? Or what things come naturally to you? These are all wonderful graces that God has poured out upon you. And these are all areas that God has equipped you to immensely serve and to bless others in. Have you considered that at times those things which are your greatest strengths are simultaneously your greatest weaknesses? I've often found that people sin in the areas of their strengths. Why? Well, it is often areas that we excel at that become the most natural, in which poses kind of the greatest temptation to operate independent from God. Well, as we begin 1 Corinthians 1 today, one of the things we're going to discover is that God has blessed the Corinthians with gifts of speech and knowledge, yet these would also be a hindrance to them effectively living out their faith. So I'm going to read 1 Corinthians 1, verses 4 through 6. I always thank God for you because his grace given you in Christ Jesus. For in him you have been enriched in every way with all kinds of speech and with all knowledge, God thus confirming our testimony among Christ, among you. So Paul tells the Corinthians that God has enriched them in speech and knowledge. So their culture put a big premium on oratory gifts and rhetoric. And it seems like the Corinthians carried this idea into the church. So their gifting in the areas of speech and knowledge were certainly strengths, but they were simultaneously an occasion for sin. In 1:17, Paul says, Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. See, our gifts are not meant to empty the cross of its power, but to accentuate its power. Our gifts are not meant to empty the cross of its power, but to lift it up. So the Corinthians were likely enamored with teachers who spoke eloquently, but this took the focus off the cross. So something that was a strength was turning into a weakness for them because it was taking their focus off of what really counted. Our strengths can often breed a self-sufficiency that severs a sweet sense of dependence and fellowship with God. God hasn't given us these gifts and strengths to hinder fellowship, but to deepen fellowship with him. The other problem in Corinth was that these oratory gifts seemed to be a cause for them to look down upon others who didn't have the same gift set. In other words, their strengths became weaknesses because their strengths turned into a source of judgment against those who didn't have eloquent speech. When I first became a Christian and was new at leading Bible studies or teaching, I would never think about doing that without studying or praying. But that became more tempting when it became a little bit more natural for me. Well, I remember God in his grace did something really sweet, and he convicted me about that big time. And since then, that has been a reality. It's really shaped the seriousness in which I take preparing and studying to preach or to teach. And so I want to leave you with a couple questions to think about. What are your strengths? And have they drawn you further from God in self-reliance? Or have they thrust you closer to him in humble dependence?